everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am so excited to bring this conversation to you about how the global uncertainty drives up the cost of every meal at our meetings. And you might not think it does, but it does. And my guest today, Mr. Mike Walden, Dr. Mike Walden, has spent more than 4 decades making economics make sense for the rest of us at NC State, my alma mater, so I'm very excited to have you here. Dr. Walden is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor Emeritus at NC State. He's author of 15 books, plus economic thrillers that he co-writes with his wife, Mary. And he's a familiar voice on national news and in newspapers across North Carolina. He's even been honored with the Order of the Longleaf Pine, one of North Carolina's highest civilian honors. And today, because we were talking about this just before we got online, is how he's going to help us understand how global uncertainty is affecting the cost of every meal, but he's going to help us break it down into terms that I can even understand about economics, because I remember taking the class. I don't know if you were my professor, but I don't think I did very well in the class. So welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So you have spent decades, as I said, explaining economic forces to everyday North Carolinians. And I did check. My New Bern, North Carolina paper does carry your articles, weekly articles. When people see food prices jump, what actually is happening behind the scenes, and why do prices move even before any real supply distribution occurs? And I can think of so many different global scenarios that this has happened.
Well, good question. And it can apply pretty much to my answer is going to apply pretty much to any commodity that people are interested in. But everything in economics comes down to 2 things: supply and demand. Supply and demand. I would tell my students when I gave them a test, they were written test, and maybe you may or may not remember this if you had me, but anyway, I'd say if you come to a question and you have no clue, just no clue about the answer, and I told them I had that situations, don't leave it blank, write down supply and demand. You'll get some credit. And you know that not all students did that, but anyway. And
because we don't listen.
Yeah. Supply is simply the amount of the product or service available to buy, and demand is how should I say? It's the intensity. How many people really want that product or service? And very simply, if the supply, if you keep the number of people constant who want to buy something, but the amount of that something shrinks for some reason, goes down, the price is going to go up. And what people might say, well, what's that have to do with it? Think of supply and demand as a teeter-totter. And the fulcrum there is the price. The fulcrum is the price keeps the supply and demand over time, not all the time, in equilibrium. In other words, you got the amount of supply you need to meet the demand. And so when there's, for example, a reduction in supply for whatever reason, and we can talk about what's going on now, what that means is there's going to be less for people to buy. And if the same number of people want to buy that, they're going to be competing for a smaller amount. And they could solve that by just fighting, of course, but we hopefully have a civilized society. And what happens is the price of that product or commodity goes up. And what that does is causes some people to say, oh, that's too much price, I'm not going to buy that. And you get back to equilibrium between the supply and the demand. And the same thing can happen if for some reason there are more people who want to buy it. That's a commodity. The price is also going to go up. And prices do go down over time, but think of that price as a sort of the fulcrum. It's at the middle of the teeter-totter. It keeps the levels on both sides the same.
I mean, it makes me also think of our rideshare programs, that when there's a whole bunch of people coming out of a concert or the NC State football game, the price to get a rideshare is going to go up.
Absolutely. And just to pick up on that, sometimes, particularly in the public sector, prices are not adjusted for supply and demand, and ticket prices are a good example of that. That's why you often see people scalping tickets. People buy tickets and then they resell them at a higher price because for whatever reason, the initial seller wasn't aware of, oh boy, everyone wants this ticket. I'm going to raise the price, or maybe they can't
Mhm.
raise the price. If it's a public entity like a university, they may have rules there. And so that's another example where you see the price adjusting. That's if you understand, if anyone understands supply, demand, and price, that's the core of economics. It doesn't matter if you're talking about groceries. It doesn't matter if you're talking about real estate. It doesn't matter if you're talking about diamonds. It's all the same principles apply.
Okay, so then when we're talking about food and people have this food is global, right? And we get rice from China or we get bananas from South America. How do global issues or challenges play on that? I mean, because there's still bananas in the grocery store every single day. And I'll just say, you can go to the grocery store and buy a banana for 69 cents or however much it is. But when you go to a hotel, there's a hotel that I was charged $7 for one banana because apparently they went to the grocery store and bought it. But how does that and I guess I want to actually go back to the global impact, the fear of what's going on, war or COVID. How does that uncertainty alone, the nervousness of global markets, translate into higher prices at the grocery store and on an event menu or a restaurant menu?
If I may, let me talk about
Mhm.
the $7 bananas that you find in a
Yes.
no. That's very, very common. And another principle in economics is that a seller will try, certainly have supply and demand going on, but also a seller will try to read the buyer, the typical buyer that they have. And think about it. If you're at a nice hotel, upscale hotel, and you're there enjoying yourself, you're probably not going to be and you're enjoying the food there, you get breakfast, etc.
Mhm.
You're probably not going to be real picky over the price. You just are going to say, well, I know I'm on vacation. This is a great hotel, fancy hotel. I'm going to pay higher prices. And the hotel management knows that. They know that people are not very the people who are staying at those high-end hotels are not necessarily going to be very sensitive, or they're aware, but they just don't care about the higher prices. So that's why, yeah, any business person will try to ascertain, is that buyer over there? Can I maybe, and of course some people are going to use a nasty word about this, but still, sellers want to try to maximize their profits. That's intuitive. If they think someone over here at a fancy hotel is going to pay $7 for a banana and they're not going to complain, they're going to try to do that. Now, to get to your question, your second question, food, of course, is universal. The food we eat here in the country
Mhm.
all is not grown here in the country. A lot of the food we have comes from outside the country. Secondly, growing food requires inputs. It's just a fancy word for what a farmer has to have: fertilizer, they have to have water, they have to have seeds, etc. They have
Mhm.
to have inputs. And that means that there are individuals. So you've got the economic market for the final food product, but you also have for all those inputs that are needed to
Mhm.
produce that food. They each have their individual markets. And what we have seen recently, to cut to the chase here, what we've seen recently, of course, is what has been the big mover and shaker in the world has been the Iran war, the
Mhm.
impact of the Iran war on oil supplies, uncertainty about oil supplies. And we've seen oil prices go up. We saw them go up dramatically when this initially started in April. Then they went down when we were in this phase where there was negotiations. Now we're going back to the shooting war, and we've already seen prices go up. And of course, oil is a fundamental a commodity that produces in various forms energy, gasoline being one of them. And so if you are in the food market, you're going to be using gasoline to deliver
Mhm.
final products. Gasoline is going to be used to deliver those inputs to the farmer, et cetera. So that's been the big mover and shaker recently, the fact that oil prices have gone up, gasoline prices gone up, and pretty much gasoline, if you look, it's probably the most universal input in our economy. Pretty much
True.
everything
Mhm.
uses gasoline either directly or indirectly. And of course, the farmers and then the beyond that, the wholesalers and the retailers. Gasoline affects all of those stages. So the short answer to your question is, why have we seen these fluctuations? Why have the food prices gone up? It's tied to what's going on in the Middle East.
Which is, I mean, it's so mind-boggling because you go to the grocery store, you go to a hotel and you order food and you don't, we take it for granted. That's a really good, I think, good way to think about it, that we take that for granted, that there are all those other inputs. I mean, there's the labor for the farmer, there's the fertilizer, and I'm assuming, like, even me, don't think about the fertilizer and all of that the farmer has to go through and utilize to get that to my plate. So when we think about those costs, why should we care and what can we do?
Well, why we should care is because it hits us in the pocketbook. That's
Right.
what we care. And we usually care most about things that we buy frequently. So the two commodities that people often complain about, especially when the prices go up, are food and gasoline, because those are the two things that we buy most frequently. So the simple answer is we care because we see it and we understand it means more money out of our pocket, which means that unless our wages go up commensurately with what those prices went up, and for example, just real quick, we just had an inflation report. Inflation is just a number that tells us in aggregate how much your price is changing. And
Okay.
I do want to clarify something because I think the media is not a good, doesn't have a, do a good job of explaining this. It creates a lot of confusion. We had an inflation report, was it yesterday or the day before, for June. So it looked at inflation, how much did prices on aggregate go up in June, and then you do this comparison to the previous June. And if you listen to the media, they said, well, the good news is inflation went down. Now, what happened is the prices were still going up, but they went up at a slower pace, 3.5%.
Gotcha.
But I have found in my talks and when I'm just talking to people at the gym or whatever, they say, I don't understand, Mike. They said that inflation went down, but the prices aren't down. So there's some confusion there. And I always like to take the opportunity to explain that there's a difference between inflation going down, which simply means prices are still going up, but they're going up at a slower pace, and prices going down, which we typically have not seen. So anyway, the reason we track this is because our pocketbook often doesn't expand at the same rate as prices. And in fact, we saw that with this most recent report because we can track average earnings of people against prices. And the average earnings of people, the average household, did not go up commensurately with what prices went up. So people are falling back. Their standard of living is going down. What I tell them, maybe you want to get into this more later, but what I tell people, well, don't starve yourself, obviously, but be a pickier buyer of food. Look for sales. Try to move if bananas are your thing, but they're too expensive, look for some substitute. I tend to love bananas, but look for some substitute. Buy in bulk. Sometimes that'll get you, but you have to employ some strategies to deal with the tighter wallet that you now have.
Right. Yeah, it is. My mom was looking at the coupons or the sales at Harris Teeter this morning before I left the house.
Yeah.
And
My wife does that. I can remember my late mother when I was doing that. Yeah, that's a very good tactic to use.
yeah. And because I eat gluten-free food costs more than non-gluten-free food. And actually I said this last week, like the price of macaroni and cheese, Kraft macaroni and cheese at Harris Teeter the other day was $1 per box, 10 boxes for $10. My gluten-free was $3.27 a box. And then, but today apparently it was on sale. So my mother was going to go grab a whole bunch of boxes.
Yeah, my wife is gluten intolerant too, so I hear you on that. And once again, probably the gluten products are going to be normally more expensive. It may be a little more expensive to produce them. Supply's not as broad, et cetera. Yeah, you may have to make accommodations. And when you certainly see sales, that's when the pounce.
Right. And when we're thinking hotel, I mean, that's a whole nother concept for a meeting professional to think about when booking a hotel. And we used to gripe, or we not gripe, but we used to say, okay, so if you want to save some money, ask your hotel what Mike is serving at his meeting, And maybe the hotel can gang those menus together and give me a cheaper price because he's not making a whole fresh menu, right? Not additional staff, et cetera. And now we complain that they have Monday meals, Tuesday meals, Wednesday meals, but it's a way for them to save their money and for us to potentially save some money as well.
And just to follow up on that point, sometimes I think people, you're not, but sometimes people are too reticent to confront a seller, we'll say hotels in this. Let's say you're looking for a hotel for a convention you're organizing and you don't like the price that hotel A has. And what you want to do is obviously go look at hotel B and C. And if for whatever reason hotels B and C are less costly, but you really want to go to hotel A, you want to go back to hotel A and say, look, I want to come to your hotel. I want to give you money, but I'm got these competitors over here. You've got these competitors. Can you make me a deal? Same thing you do when you shop for a car. My wife is, when she's bought car, oh, you don't want to be with her. You don't want to be a car salesman. She just devastates them because she's such a good bargainer and she knows the facts because she goes to these other dealers. So oftentimes if there is a situation that you're in, where you do have some bargaining power, you have some leverage power. Now, if you're in a grocery store and you want to buy bananas, the only bargaining power you might have would be to go and look at what banana prices are in another store. But oftentimes you got to buy your stuff and get going. But if you're buying a car or something or making a hotel reservation, you do have time, or you should take the time to compare.
Yeah. And it's challenging, and I think majority of us do look at different properties, but when your client's like, nope, I want to go to this hotel and this in this city, it makes it a lot harder for that negotiation. But you need to find that negotiation, something to negotiate at least.
Well, if your clients, your members may, if that's what they want to do, and they realize it's a higher price, but so be it. They shouldn't therefore complain later if they do.
Right, exactly.
Especially be
so, right, exactly. Now, okay, so say we get a quote that's like 15 to 20% higher than last year's, the hotel, and the hotel just says, well, costs are up. The full cost of that ingredient, we touched on it a little bit before, but the ingredients, the labor, the transportation, the energy, how do we understand and how can we potentially work with those people who are buying those foods to better understand what their challenges are and why our costs are up? Does that make sense?
Well, no, it makes sense. Now, you're probably not going to have access to all of those details that that affects the hotel's cost. One thing you can do off the bat to make sure they're not gouging you or taking advantage of you is to go and look up what has been for the average expenditure, what's been the increase in prices over whatever time periods you're comparing. Those data are available at a place called BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're the federal agency that collects. What they do is they hire people. Every federal government hires thousands of people every month to go around the country and collect prices for everything you can think of. They would have hotel prices in there too. And what we tend to hear from the media is they then take all those prices, they do a weighted average, and that's the so-called inflation rate. But you can get it broken down by particular commodity. So that would be the first thing I would do if I was trying to set up a convention at a hotel for a group, and I found that, wow, it's 15% higher, more expensive for a room this year than last year. First thing I would do is go to BLS.gov, find the hotel entry, and then you just take the division, see what the index was last year, what was the index this year? If it's higher, what percentage was it in? And if it came down to 15%, you might say, well, hey, it is what it is. If it was only 5%, then you might say, are they trying to get away with something here? But I'm going to be smart here, and I'm going to tell them, look, we want to come to your hotel, but you've raised your price 3 times what the average hotel has. I can't afford that. And you may get a positive response from them.
Now, on that note, I know that every year hotels raise their prices by 3%. And is that a standard, and everything goes up? And then we're not going to have prices again from before COVID. These prices are going to stay here, and they might move up a penny versus 5 cents, but should we, and I'm going to say this because somebody was like, all right, well, I book my meetings 5 years out. How do I guesstimate how much my food and beverage costs are going to go up 5 years out?
Well,
Is that
again, you could go again. If I was doing this and trying to answer that question, I would go to bls.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, find the price section, price information, and then you can go through, scroll through there. They've got thousands of items, but you could find, I'm sure, a hotel entry, hotel cost, average cost of a hotel room, for example. I'm sure there's something like that for hotels. And then you could look back, go back as many years you want to, maybe 10, 15, and you could calculate. I mean, this is simple math. You could calculate an average increase, average annual increase, and then you could project, assuming that that average annual increase is going to continue, you could project 10 years out or whatever, 15 years out about what it would be. Now, of course, they may not, they may try to get away with some things, or it
right?
may that if the hotel made some upgrades, let's say they didn't have a hotel, they didn't have a indoor pool, it's one of the or tennis court or something, but now they do have those amenities. You would expect to see that reflected in the price a little bit. But what I'm saying here is that there is information that you can, for whatever. We're talking about
Right.
hotel, for anything. You can go to the government and get, this is where the government's useful. You can go to the government and look at how these prices have changed and use that as a support, or as to why the price that you're going to have to pay now is what it is, or use it to say, hey, you guys are way out of line here. You're
Right.
trying to pull one over on us, and we're not going to stay with you unless you change.
That's a really interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because typically we just sign food and beverage, even though we have a food and beverage minimum when we book a hotel, but we really don't pay attention to that. We just assume that we have to pay the 300,000 and we're going to figure it out. But it's really good to come to that negotiation table on your hotel contract in general to talk about the food and beverage prices. Yeah.
And what you need are two things you need. So you've got your favorite hotel, but you need costs from other hotels, and then you need that data from the federal government that will give you the broader picture.
Okay. No, that's smart. I'm going to go do that on my next event. Okay, so food away from home inflation has behaved differently than grocery store inflation. What makes restaurant, hotel catered food pricing so much more sensitive to labor and energy costs than the food at the supermarket?
Because they're two different things. Obviously, food at home, you go buy it, you bring it home, you fix it, and so it's your labor, it's your time, etc. In a hotel, they buy the food, but then they've got to prepare it, they've got to hire labor for it, etc. So that's one big difference. But the other difference goes back to what I said before. If you think about people going to, now you may be different because you do this for a living and you have groups, but if you think about the average person going to a nice upscale hotel, maybe they're going to New York for a weekend, and they're staying at a fancy hotel and they want to splurge, they want to really treat themselves. They're not gonna be sensitive to these things. I mean, they may not like paying the price, but they're not gonna argue. They're gonna say, well, this is what it takes now, and I'm on vacation, and I'm not going to argue, et cetera. So the hotels know that. So they may have a little more leeway to pump prices up a little more because they don't have a buyer there that's going to really push back.
Okay. Yeah. And if you're fitting into a space or filling a need that they have, that helps your negotiation pricing right there.
Oh yeah, especially if you're talking about, like you're talking about conventions with potentially hundreds, if not thousands of people. That's a big meal ticket for the hotel.
Right.
So they're going to be much more sensitive in terms of trying to appease you and get you to, rather than me. If my wife and I went to New York and we said, "Oh, we don't like the price here," they said, "Well, go somewhere else." I mean, we're not going to change their bottom line. So actually, the big groups like what you deal with, you've got some power there.
Yeah. And we need to think through that and have the bargaining chips or the knowledge behind us.
Exactly.
So to come to the table.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So consumer behavior. and you've studied this for years as it relates to economics, when food costs rise, how do businesses, food business, hotels, caterers, restaurants, typically decide between raising their prices, shrinking portions, or changing menus? And what should we be looking for? I mean, there's a lot of chat, eat local, right? So you're not buying big bulks of food that's coming from another part of the country or the world. Eat as much as local as possible. But that local impacts, you can talk about the gas and fertilizer and labor there, but how do they figure out when to do what?
Well, I think it depends on the hotel. If it's, again, a New York, big swank New York hotel, they're not going to worry too much about this because they know that people coming. Many of the people coming in New York have to come there because they have meetings there. So they
Right.
they have an audience, or they have a clientele that is not as sensitive to these price changes. They don't like the prices going up, but they're not sensitive because they don't have any alternatives. In contrast, I'll just take a city in North Carolina. I'll say Greenville, North Carolina. And they don't have as much power. I mean, Greenville's a nice place to go to, but people can, if you're doing some kind of a meeting in North Carolina and you're looking at Greenville and you don't like the prices, well, we're going to look somewhere else. And Greenville, the hotels there know that. So they're going to be much more sensitive to their customers, and they're probably going to look for ways that they can accommodate the higher cost. Not all of them. They're going to be some a pass through, but they're going to look for ways that they can accommodate those higher costs. And maybe, like you said, change their menu, change their type of meals, et cetera, because they rely on those folks coming, and the folks that are coming have alternatives even in the region.
Right. Well, and I'm actually sitting in Greenville, North Carolina right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was just
Right. Yeah. Rachel Witten, my friend, the CEO of this Convention and Visitors Bureau. So there's a plug for you, Rach. So, okay, let's just jump to North Carolina really quickly on that, because I mean, we've got Asheville, the Outer Banks, to Wilmington, to Greenville, to Raleigh. How is the economic, how does it impact? Does it impact different parts of the state differently?
Oh, sure, sure. I mean, people know. I mean, if you look at North Carolina, the big cities are Charlotte and Raleigh. And Raleigh's actually coming on more. I'm seeing Raleigh talked about more in some cases than Charlotte, but obviously Charlotte and Raleigh, we get conventions. Look, Raleigh obviously hosted the Stanley Cup Finals. Raleigh gets a lot of conventions, et cetera. So they're moving. Charlotte and Raleigh are moving in to the situation that those big hotels in New York City, Philadelphia, et cetera, have. So they're going to be more like the behavior of those hotels. On the other hand, Greenville, great town, not as powerful. And now I go back, Asheville would probably be in the category of Raleigh and Charlotte. People go there for the mountains and et cetera, et cetera. So again, they have some power. But Greenville, Fayetteville, Rocky Mount, I mean, you can name innumerable ones, all they're going to be aware of obviously the economics, but they just don't, in terms of their audiences, they just don't have the sway of the audience, because the audience or their buyers can say, oh, well, I'll go to a motel down the road here, or I'll go meeting to, if you're planning a meeting in North Carolina like you're doing, I'll take my meeting over to New Bern, for example. So yeah, definitely two different situations.
Yeah. Okay, so when I'm going to jump back to planners and budgets, if all of these increases come in and they're talking to their CFO, or the board about their event and the prices, what talking points can they have to say, hey, how can they explain the forces to the CFO? And a friend of mine actually just did a post the other day showing the 5 big buckets of different types of events and how much they cost, right? And it's kind of amazing the cost of items these days, but what talking points can we have when we're talking to the C-suite to saying, hey, this is what it costs. It's not just like we're going to go through a birthday party and go to Party City and buy the supplies. I don't want to say how can we sound smarter, but how can we talk at the C level there about that?
If I was in that position, the first thing I would do is take data that I found from BLS.gov and just say, look, here's the average increase in this is an average for all prices. The average increase, I think the average increase since COVID is what, 15 for the average thing that we buy. It's at least 15, 20, 25% higher. I think it's in the 20s,
Wow.
20% higher than pre-COVID. COVID did a number on us, and then we had inflation after COVID, et cetera. So hopefully the CEOs are aware of this, but if they're not, present them with the information saying, hey, we're not trying to, we're not living it up here. We're not hiring the Rolling Stones to come and entertain us. We're not looking at hotels that only do top flight meals. This is just what it costs for the average place that we've gone to in the past. And look, everything's gone up. And you present them with the information.
Right.
That'd be the tactic I would use.
Okay. And I know, just going back to a single ingredient, the price of coffee is mind-boggling. You know, how much hotels charge us for coffee in Des Moines versus San Diego versus Atlanta. I mean, there's people who've paid $250 for a gallon of coffee, and which is mind-boggling. So, talking agriculture, because we were talking North Carolina, it is a huge part of our economy here, and is California and Florida as well. Are there regional dynamics, the crops, the ports? I mean, Miami's got a lot more ports than North Carolina does, that affect our local hotels and caterers, that what they pay for food and beverage versus the rest of the country?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. Florida, California, probably New York, you have more access, because there are more interactions, transportation interactions between those areas and the rest of the world. But I would say I've been here now 40, almost 50 years. No, I actually have 50 years. When I moved here, my wife and I moved here in the 70s. North Carolina was sort of considered still a kind of a backwater. I don't think did we have any professional teams then? I don't think so.
NC
And
State.
that's college, but yeah, but transportation and access to markets in different parts of the world certainly was limited. We were just starting, as I recall, just starting to finish the interstate system. Our major port has always been Wilmington, but Wilmington was considered backwater. Now, Wilmington is, in fact, I was in this new book I have coming out from UNC Press. I had an occasional look at our transportation situation in North Carolina. Wilmington is considered the most efficient port on the East Coast. That includes everything.
Really?
Yeah, and Wilmington has, you can access to the rest of the world, is you can get that through Wilmington. We have then another way of access, of course, is through international airports. We've got three of them, I think: Triad, Raleigh, and Charlotte international airports. So yeah, we have a great interstate system now. Gosh, I can get my car, I'm here in Raleigh. I can get in my car and be down in Wilmington within probably 2.5 hours. Won't say how fast I go, but anyway, not too far. So yeah, the North Carolina has really come along, and I'm not just saying that because I've been here 50 years and I love the state. But if you look at the data, it shows that North Carolina has really, really come on. I think that's one of the reasons why we are attracted. We are attracted to, for example, big companies, but also something that people follow, Major League Sports. Now here in Raleigh, my gosh, we're talking, there's a buzz about maybe Raleigh can get a Major League Baseball team, which would,
Oh, wow.
being from Cincinnati, I would love. So yeah, this state in the span of 50 years has really, really come on from sort of being, yeah, that's North Carolina. Who wants to go there or do anything there? To now a state where any business worth their salt in the country is aware of North Carolina. And probably if they want to expand, they're going to be looking at North Carolina. The tech companies that we've been able to attract, especially here where I am in the Triangle area, pharmaceutical companies, et cetera. Yeah, those days of this area being sort of second, third, fourth, whatever tier you want to go down to, we're up there now at the top tier. People in the rest of the, and I still deal with people outside of North Carolina. They know Raleigh. They know about Raleigh, and they know about Charlotte. They know about the Triad too, and they probably know about Wilmington.
Yeah, they do. The beaches of North Carolina as well. Like everybody loves the Outer Banks.
And I was
okay.
Just as a footnote, because I always like to plug our public workers. We have an incredible business recruitment group out of the Department of Commerce. Chris Chung has been running that for decades. And it is, we have North Carolina, and you talk about politics, you say, well, the governor's one party, the General Assembly's another party, they're going to fight all the time. When it comes to economic development, and this is not just what the current situation goes back, comes to economic development, pretty much every politician, despite that they may be of different parties, is on the same page. They want
Wow.
to they want to put North Carolina in an attractive position and sell North Carolina because they know that that ultimately brings in more money, it brings in jobs, oftentimes higher paying jobs, et cetera, just makes the state better. So we have a phenomenal business recruiting segment of our state, as well as with our elected leaders working together to make North Carolina shine.
Oh, that's good to know. Although I don't want a lot more people. I lived in Atlanta for 22 years. I like my New Bern.
Well, I know that I can remember
yeah.
people, I can remember lots of people, I haven't heard too much recently, but people saying, yeah, we don't want to grow too fast. We don't want to be Atlanta. And that,
Right.
and you brought up a good point. That is an issue. I mean, anything, as an economist, pretty much anything that happens, there are pluses and minuses. And certainly with growth, economic growth, the pluses already mentioned, but you've got minuses, you've got more congestion. You tend to see housing prices go up faster, especially in those areas where people want to live. You maybe get a reduction in open space, less farms, et cetera. So yeah, there we do have to consider the cost, and I have a whole chapter in my new book about that. We do have to consider the cost, weigh the cost, et cetera. So there, yeah, everything comes with some sort of a price.
Exactly. Okay, so nobody has a crystal ball, but you've been studying economics for 40 plus years. But based on what you're seeing in energy markets and farm inputs and consumer demand, what should the hospitality industry, meeting planners, restaurateurs realistically budget over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, again, I'm glad you prefaced your question by it's hard to forecast, and it certainly is. Well, with this particular situation with energy, it's not as if the world doesn't have oil and gasoline, et cetera. It's out there. But the issue, of course, over the last since April has been the war in the Middle East and what that's done to restrict the supply of oil, which can affect obviously directly the price of gasoline. And I'm somewhat optimistic right now because we're back into a shooting war, the US is, with Iran. But it looks like the energy markets have not been as adversely impacted this time around versus the first time it happened in April and May. And I think part of the reason is everyone now knows this name, the Strait of Hormuz. Who doesn't know where that is? That has not been as adversely impacted. Oil is still getting out. I think the U.S. is restricting Iranian oil from getting out, but the Arab countries that border that strait they're getting oil out. There are actually pipelines being built across Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, so that they won't have to use the strait. That's a couple of years down the road. But I'm cautiously optimistic. We've seen a little bit of a spike in oil and gas prices. They were going down. They've trended up a little bit, but I don't think we're going to see the worst that we had in April and May. And hopefully the shooting war will come to an end at some point. I'm certainly not going to try to predict that. So I guess I'm more optimistic now. Now, long run, if you're talking about years in the future, hopefully this will be settled and
Right.
we can go back to normal, and higher oil prices and higher gas prices won't be the issue. But I'm hoping the current situation will be wrapped up. Again, I have no way of knowing, but be wrapped up. Oh, I'd say by the start of the fall, whatever wrapped up means. Maybe is
Right.
Iran is being overthrown and a new government, or is there a settlement, et cetera? Don't know. But it looks like the adverse reaction has not been as bad as what we had in the first round of this.
Well, I find it fascinating that economics is so dependent on all of those things, right?
Well,
And
it's
yeah.
supply and demand. I mean, we're
hmm
talking about energy. Oil is
hmm
part of that. So it's not that economics is the end all and be all of everything, but it's just that everything has some economics component.
Yeah. Okay. So you have written 15 nonfiction books on economics.
Mhm.
Wow. Like nonfiction books on economics. But you and your wife
I know people are
also,
thinking, oh, yeah.
but you and your wife write some economic thrillers like featuring I'm an economist heroine, Dia Fenner. What
Okay.
made you just decide, and you've explained economics very simply, what made you decide to make the heroine an economist?
I'll give you the background here. First of all, I
Okay.
like to write. But secondly, my wife and I know exactly how this started. My wife and I, my wife's older sister lives in Charlottesville, so we occasionally drive up to Charlottesville to see her and her husband. And gosh, was this 10 years ago, I think? We're driving up there, going up 86, 29. And we're chatting. My wife was still teaching then. She retired about 15 years ago, but she was still teaching elementary school. She taught elementary school. I taught the older kids. I always complained to her if some of my kids weren't well prepared, I'd blame her. You can imagine how that would go. Anyway, and we were sharing our, I can't use some of the words that word I'm thinking of. We were just sharing our complaints about our particular teaching. And she would complain about some things. And one of the things I complained about, I said, Mary, we have to, my students have to buy an economics textbook. And I said, there are these heavy things, they're thick, they're expensive. I think in the day, this was 10 years ago, I think they were at least $50. And I know the majority of my students don't read them. They know they have to buy it. They don't read them. And that's such a waste of money. And I really feel bad to them. And I said, I get it. They're not real. If you want to go to sleep, pick up an economic textbook. But if you want to learn, I get it that people just don't like reading. It's economic professors' writing sometimes can be very abstract. And she said, well, is there anything you can do about that? And I said, well, you know what? I've been thinking about it. I wonder if I could write, because I do like to write, and I've had some success publishing. I said, I would, maybe I could write something that was entertaining, but still got the concepts across. And that was the birth of, as you said, Dia Fenner, our heroine. And why did I make it a female? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Her name popped in my head, and I thought, well, hey, that'd be fun. And so I was able to write. I think my wife, I write the draft. She looks at the draft, makes changes. So we're co-authors. And I think before I retired, I had maybe four of them done. No, three of them.
Wow.
And I offered those to my students as well. You have to put out a few bucks, but and I had good reaction from the students. They said, Dr. Walden, I really like these. They're fun. They're much better. They're much more fun than that $50, 50-pound
Pound, right?
pounder. And so that was the whole start of it. And now that I've retired, I continue to do it. I enjoy writing. And so we're on, and each of the books is focused on a particular part of economics. So we've got a micro, if you remember your economics, there's microeconomics, there's macroeconomics. So we got a book on each of those. Fiscal economics, we got a book on that. We have a book on what I would call public economics, talking about budgets and so forth, public budgets. And the latest one that we're working on is on trade. In fact, the title is Trade Trouble, because that's been in the news with tariffs and so on and so forth. So that was the genesis of the Dia Fenner economic thrillers.
Okay, well, I'm going to go check them out so that it helps me understand them as well, going back to college. Okay, so just real quickly, because you just mentioned tariffs, and this is are they good, they bad, they're necessary, I don't know.
As you've taken economics, economists like trade. We think trade is really the basis of economics. And by trade, I mean, you can look at it at the personal sense. I had a career as a teacher. My wife had a career as a teacher. We had little gardens, but we couldn't grow all our food. We couldn't be good at farming, or we didn't choose that. People are best in the economic world when they find out what they're good at doing, what they want to do, focus on doing that. And then essentially, if everyone does that, everything is produced, but then you trade. It's not as if I go to a farmer and trade that farmer for my teaching assistant, but this all gets exposed, obviously, in markets. But the notion is that we have a more efficient, we have a more plentiful, we have a richer society if people trade because they're focusing on the skills that they are best at. And that then to the world. There are things that, well, for example, the Middle East, they specialize in oil and energy. In the U.S., well, we produce a fair amount of oil and energy, although I will say when people say the U.S. is energy independent, we're not really because we don't have the right kind of oil for the refineries we still have to import. So, for example, just to continue with the illustration, the U.S. is very good at farming. We have great farmers, we have great rich land. So it makes sense for us to say, hey, for Saudi Arabia, we're gonna buy from you what you really do well, that's oil, and we're gonna sell to you what we do well, which is grow food. Because Saudi Arabia is, of course, a desert. So that's just a simple example of
Okay.
so in general, as an economist, tariffs are a impediment to trade because what a tariff does is says that, okay, if Saudi Arabia is selling us some oil, before it gets to wherever it's going in the US, there has to be a 20% tariff charge, meaning 20%, whatever, let's say the oil is $1,000. You have to add 20% of $1,000. And obviously that impedes it. Now, I will quickly say, because this is something that annoys me because it's wrong when you hear it. Some will say, and I won't mention, I have one person in mind, but some will say that, well, this is a win-win for the U.S. because, yeah, we charge the tariffs, but it's the exporter, in my example, the Saudi Arabia, who have to pay that tariff. That is blatantly, totally wrong. It's the importer, it's the U.S. company that's importing the oil that pays the tariff. So I think we've had in the last couple of years several billions of dollars of tariffs collected in the U.S., but that's all paid by U.S. companies. It's not paid by the foreign companies. So that's another reason to question tariffs because you're just adding cost to businesses. And of course, what are the businesses going to do? They're going to eventually pass those costs on to their buyers. So one of the reasons we've had higher prices in especially the last 2 years, is tariffs because businesses pass those on.
Thank you for that clarification because it is and even like talking about my running sneakers, I'm like, hey, I've got to pay more money for these now because of the tariffs that are put onto why the the shoe company or shoe store has to pay those things to get them. Yeah.
I will not mention names here, but those who support tariffs, they will say, you'll hear them say, well, yeah, Walden's right, or people bring this up, right? Yeah, the importers, U.S. companies, but they'll find a way to negotiate with the exporter and say, we're pushing some of this back on you. No, there have been studies that have looked at that. Maybe in 20% of the situations that happen. So largely speaking, the tariffs are paid by our U.S. companies, and ultimately they're paid by the U.S. consumer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Okay. Some really quick rapid fire questions. What's the best meal you've ever had at a conference or event?
Oh, at a conference or event?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know.
Can you remember?
No,
Your faculty meetings?
No, I will say in Raleigh, it's the Second Empire.
Okay.
We always go there we've got a 46th wedding anniversary coming up, so we'll probably go to the
Congratulations.
And that's just our taste. Other restaurants are good in Raleigh too, but when I think of a really good meal, I think of Second Empire. But other than that, I can't think of anything. No.
Okay, so let's see, in a month, there's an NC State football game. Football kicks off. So what's your favorite tailgate food?
Oh, my favorite tailgate food would probably be barbecue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. When I was in school way back when and before we had assigned parking spots, we would, bring out whole hogs and roast them all day long and eat that. So I love that barbecue.
Yeah, barbecue. I even had barbecue when I was growing up in Cincinnati. Barbecue is all over. Yeah, and certainly it's a specialty here in North Carolina.
Yes, definitely.
I tell you real fast, I got to squeeze this in. I was over talking somewhere in the eastern part of the state, and there's this rivalry between Eastern barbecue and Western barbecue. And I think I told the event who was the person who was handling the event, said, I never had the Western barbecue. And they, oh, we got to get it to you. They called in a police patrolman to lead me. No, I'm serious. This is happening. To lead me to. I was driving my car over there to lead me to a restaurant so I could experience Western barbecue. I mean, I had
Wow.
he took us through red lights and everything because he needed to get there in time for lunch.
Oh my goodness. And then you didn't have to stand in line because you were with the
That's
police.
right. Oh yeah, they didn't know. I came in with the policeman, and yeah, right at the front. Yeah,
Wow. Was it good?
shows you the power of barbecue.
Then do you like West or East better then?
I don't. They're different. I don't think I would choose between. I don't think I would choose between the two. They're different. I like different situations.
Okay. Now, Dia Fenner, your character in your fiction books about economics, if you got a movie deal, who would you want to
Oh
play
yeah,
her?
you asked me that, and I haven't really sat through that, thought about that. Probably the person that I would recommend, but she may be too old now, simply because I like her, is Nicole Kidman. But
Mhm.
we could get Nicole looking to be in her. Well, we could make her. Dia can be in her 30s. Yeah, maybe Nicole can do that. Yeah, she'd be
Yeah.
my. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. If finish the sentence. Every meal should.
Every meal should be eaten at the same time you are being thankful to those farmers who have helped produce that meal. And the reason I say that is in my job, I have a lot of interaction with farmers. And that is both my grandfathers in Ohio were farmers. One was a hog farmer, one was a cattle farmer. That is tough work. It's not just physically hard, but prices, if you talk about, we were talking about prices earlier, how prices can move around. Probably in farming, prices move around more than in any other industry. It's hard for them to know, all right, can I buy this? Well, I'll get the return when I sell
Mhm.
what I'm producing. So yeah, whenever you eat food, just thank the farmers because they work very, very hard. We're lucky in North Carolina to have great farmers.
I love that. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Now, Mike, where can everybody pick up your Dia Fenner books?
Oh, well, Amazon. Amazon would be the.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all there. Just write in Fenner Economic Thriller, and I think all four of them that are out there now will appear, as well as my less thrilling maybe books. The 15, I think you said 15 nonfiction books that I have. They're all in there, and then I have the new one coming up from UNC Press. It's actually, you can go on UNC and Press and pre-order it. I think it's actually going to hit the stands in October. I think October,
Okay.
but it's called Economics, North Carolina in the Anxious Age. And the reason I use anxious age is we've got all this uncertainty swirling around. And we talked about it today about oil prices. AI, of course, is one of the big uncertainties, how that's going to impact the economy and people and jobs, et cetera. So this is a book that looks at North Carolina, where we are now, a little bit about where we've been, but where are we going? And how are these big factors that are swirling around the country and the world, in fact, how are they going to affect North Carolina? Is North Carolina still going to continue growing? How is it going to grow? What kind of industries are going to have? What kind of, do we may need to make changes to our educational system, et cetera? So that's all in that book.
Okay, awesome. Well, I look forward to that. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to make sure that my Convention and Visitors Bureau friends get that as well so they can understand what's going on in the state. So thank you so much for spending this hour with me. It's really been enlightening and brings me back to college economics. But I'm glad that you simplified it down to saying it really is just about supply and demand, and we need to understand that.
If we have
So,
any students listening, make sure you keep that in mind. And you get a question, write down supply and demand.
supply and demand.
Go to
Okay.
the and say, look, this guy told me everything is supply and demand.
All right. You get some bonus points for that one.
Yeah.
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. Next week, actually, we're going to talk about the price of beef with the professor from Oklahoma State University, because we're just talking about costs right now. Dr. Mike Walden, thank you so much again for your time. And hopefully we can go meet you for a cup of coffee at the bookstore
Okay.
in Raleigh when I'm there next time.
Excellent.
All right. All right. Thanks. Everybody, until then, stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.